Deep breath. The tides of universal life force were drawn in to be directed along the singing nerve sheaths by concentrated mind, and thrown down hard to the base of the spine, there to be risen by mind which knew only one objective, that of complete mastery over the latent powers within. Powers which just awaited the key, the chord to bring them into active, vibrant movement. Tremendous effort. And then she, this great mysterious goddess Kundalini, which all men strive to raise, did move. This time, though, apparently easier and even more surely than she had before. It was as though she, in her grace, had decided that this was some divine and auspicious occasion. Gently at first, creeping almost like a snake, she came upwards and ever upwards. The burning sensation in the base of the spine, which had been felt many times before, was experienced this time. But as if the gods themselves were standing guard over the adept, his detachment from the excruciating pain was even more complete than ever it had been before. She moved gently upwards, and when she pierced the solar plexus center, even though his eyes were closed to the world, he could see more surely than ever he had when those eyes were physically opened. He struggled on and gradually moved her through the solar plexus center, climbing, creeping slowly, gently, yet as sure as the light of the sun, did he bring her upwards. Great rivers of perspiration streamed down his face and neck, even though he was so cold he could have wept. Though he could not move one leg, he shook as though afflicted with ague when his spine vibrated in sympathy with the tremendously powerful rising forces. When after what seemed an age of shaking mental agony, in all her grace, she dwelt within the heart center, his vision was extended. No longer was the world built of gross physical matter, but had a strangely subtle pattern which normal man could not appreciate. No longer did a color stand alone, but was surrounded by musical tones which went resonating into the distance. Yet those ears could hear them even to the farthest ends of this distance. His vision was extended through the place he was in and beyond. It was as though he had all-seeing vision. Mysteries which had remained to this day, like ancient charts lost beneath the ocean of forgetfulness, came before his eyes, and he saw, read, and understood them. Then steadfast, not content with even this, he fervently fought for her added grace to climb even further upwards, and she came. When she entered the throat center, he sat immobile, as one in physical death, yet pulsating with greater life than he had ever experienced before. As she entered and dwelt within the throat center, she lent to this her grace and power, and his world became one of sound as well as vision. 1,000,000 sounds were appreciated. Those nerves within his body, which were still alive, thrilled to the exotic symphonic nature of nature itself. He felt at this time he was at one with nature, but was soon to find that this was just a small beginning. The great power rose upwards, as though by the grace of some invisible but merciful God. She rose slowly, surely, creeping ever upwards, taking him into even higher realms than this. Then, all of a sudden, she emerged from the top of the spine, and in a glorious flash, the Christ center was open. He began to know who he was. and why he came. At this time, immobile, cold as if dead, he experienced even a greater life than most men have ever dreamed of, and yet, in some strange way, was detached from it all. It was as though he, a light, was alone in the universe. It was as though he, at this moment, was being probed by a radiant beam of exploring intelligence, so intense, so ancient, so wise, that it knew his every movement from his initial birth a million years ago until this day, and even beyond that, to some dim part of the future, so distant as to be beyond even his enhanced comprehension. The great light shone apparently through him to almost what was to the adept infinity, and seemed in some strange way to return to him with the wisdom of the ages collected by its immense journey. As the great goddess of power dwelt within the chakra, the adept in true deep meditation became a knower. He felt that this state, despite his complete aloneness, was the ultimate. He knew later that this feeling was but an expression of his ignorance, for suddenly, even as a great shock to him, this great power reached to the uppermost branch of the tree, and then gradually at first, but surely, the highest center opened. It was as though in a moment he wore above his head a crown of indescribable magnificence. A glorious brilliant flash of illumination came to him. The powers before were nothing in comparison with this. Oh God, he was going even further upwards. His loneliness subsided, as a calm will stop the turbulence of waves at sea, and peace began. But not a static peace, for in this was all movement. He began to stretch outwards, as though he had immense arms which were embracing all things. His consciousness reached outwards, and gradually came the realization of oneness. No longer was he a light in the wilderness as he had been before, but now he was an essential part, an intimate part, an interrelated part of all things. His consciousness soared above the environment, above the city in which his cold body sat immobile, around the city, around all things, all people, and all environment. Soaring upwards and outwards, he was now in full and complete realization that he was life, which was manifesting in countless different ways in order to gain the experience necessary, the control demanded over matter itself. Here, in such an elevated state as this, came a deeper realization than ever before of the interrelationship of all things, of the life of all things. When he dwelt for a moment upon a rock, it sprang into vibrant life before his eye. It breathed, it had feeling, it had disappointment. The rock, in some vague way, experienced passion. It had a soul, a veritable spiritual essence, which linked it with him, with all. As the state became even more advanced, he felt as though he was above the world, embracing it all, a part of it, living with it in complete intimacy, knowing it, appreciating it, loving it as he had never felt love before. He became one with that upon which his superconsciousness dwelt. He became detached from this oneness when he felt he should, in order to learn from the experience of detachment, and attached when he wanted to, in order to learn from the experience of attachment. He became existence in timelessness, he became vitally aware of the dimensions in which he existed and knew them all 7 of them. He became as tiny as a molecule when he wanted to, and yet bigger than a world when he wished. He looked down from his lofty position, high above the earth, appreciating its great glory, its power, its supreme light, perceiving the limitations it had put upon itself in order to allow life streams like him to gain the very experience which he was now living through in almost godlike ecstasy.